Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be our final lecture for the semester. Today we're going to spend time discussing social order crimes as they relate to things like alcohol use, gambling, and drug use. So let's get started. First up, we have the issue of alcohol use and alcoholism. Alcoholism is actually recognized as a disease by the American Medical Association when they declared it as such in 1956. Alcoholism is something that has ruined numerous lives, but the legal and medical distinction of the term are often a bit disjointed. When we talk about alcoholism in the legal sense, we're referring to alcohol use and recurring intoxication. Public intoxication, of course, refers to being inebriated while in public. But think about this one for a second. How many of us might go to a bar for happy hour or have a few drinks with our dinner? At one point or another, who among us has not been intoxicated in public? But that's not the issue here. In order to be charged with public intoxication, your behavior has to be disturbing or troubling to others. You have to cause a disturbance, draw attention to yourself, try and fight someone, or cause some sort of chaos due to your intoxication. Then the police will normally look to your speech, your movements, and your appearance to determine whether or not alcohol might be the culprit here. Some states say that it's not enough just to be drunk and loud in public. These states require that you have to put yourself or others in harm's way and make it a safety issue. It's one thing to be singing loudly in public or arguing with somebody. If you're on the sidewalk trying to get home, then that's fine. But what if you decided you're going to walk down the middle of a 3-lane roadway rather than be on the sidewalk? That's now dangerous to yourself, that's dangerous to the cars who may not see you, and it's actually dangerous to those who do see you and try and swerve not to hit you. Like everything, there are different grades and variations to all legal and illegal behavior. It's just up to the state and to the arresting officer as to whether or not your behavior is enough to warrant an arrest. Of course, things have become more dangerous anytime there is a vehicle involved with alcohol in combination. DWI, DUI, and DUBL laws have been put in place in order to deter individuals from driving home drunk or intoxicated. The legal standard for drunk driving is .08, and if you are found to be higher than that, you can be found criminally liable for one of the laws that you are found on your screen. DUI convictions often result in thousands of dollars of fines. It can result in jail or prison time, and often result in a suspended license. Some individuals say that if you're ever pulled over while you're intoxicated, that you should not consent to a field sobriety test and simply ask the officer to take you into the station. The problem with that is that as a licensed driver, you have inherently consented to any and all testing that the police may ask to perform. If you deny them the ability to test you, you are essentially providing evidence toward your own conviction. Next up, we have to discuss the differences between gambling and gaming. Gambling is illegal, except for specific areas that deem it to be legal, and consists of any sort of game that requires you to place a bet on the outcome of that game. Gaming, on the other hand, is legal and in a lot more areas, but is often regulated by the state. States are allowed to make gambling legal wherever they want. But for the most part, we do not see legal gambling everywhere. We see it in huge meccas like Las Vegas and Atlantic City. But there are slightly smaller allowances in places like Mobile and Bossier City, which are a lot closer to us here in Texas. Otherwise, you see more casinos popping up on places like Indian reservations. At those casinos, like those in Florida and Oklahoma, most of the casinos' daily operations are run by those of Native American descent, and the casino's profits are used for welfare issues on the reservation lands. It's a different sort of setup than those in Atlantic City and Las Vegas. So what then separates gambling and gaming other than legality and regulation? We have to look at exactly what is involved in each. If luck is the predominant factor in the activity, then that's considered gambling. This doesn't mean that the activity cannot involve some sort of skill, but you have to ask what is the dominating elements that determine the result of the game. If you play a game of pool, that's something that involves skill more than it involves luck. You are the one who is shooting the pool balls, and you are the one who is responsible for whether or not you win or lose the game. Social gambling is allowed as long as nobody makes a profit. So this means that I can bet you $20 on the outcome of a football game, and that's completely legal. But what happens when we get an office pool together and you all elect me to be in charge of the pool and the money? I agree to do it if I can get a 10% cut off of all of the money bet. Then that's illegal. Anytime that a third party makes money from conducting the betting pool, the state no longer allows for that activity to take place. We also see the limits on the amount of money that an individual can win, and in some instances we allow for charitable organizations to be the ones who profit. Here in town there is a bingo hall that advertises for their bingo games. If you watch the commercials, they state all of the beneficiaries who receive part of the money from the bingo hall's profits. Churches, fire departments, nursing homes, daycares, and other places are all listed as recipients. Some churches even hold bingo nights themselves so they can directly receive the profits. These types of actions are fine, provided that the state allows for them to receive that money. Just because gambling is legal in places like Las Vegas and Atlantic City doesn't mean that you're allowed to gamble long distances from your home. You aren't allowed to call in a bet or place a bet online. These actions are prohibited via the Interstate Wire Act of 1961, which outlaws this type of long-distance betting. What is interesting about this act is that it doesn't actually prevent you from placing the bet, but it does not allow for the casino or the individual in question from receiving your funds. So in essence, yes, it does prevent you from successfully placing money down to support your bet. This means that you could place a bet on winning the Super Bowl team, whatever team wins, but if you win, you cannot collect and you can't send a casino the money for that bet. So that means you're going to need to go to Vegas yourself in person and physically place that bet. Now we're going to switch gears for the rest of the lecture and we're going to discuss the issue of controlled substances. A lot of the substances that are now illegal have all been legal at some point in American history. Marijuana, for example, was actually made illegal in 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Act, which banned its use and its sale. Other drugs become illegal and the entire drug law structure was really shaken up in 1970 with the passage of the Controlled Substances Act, which grouped drugs together in 5 different schedules as we know them to be today. But each administration has made drug use a priority ever since Richard Nixon really began the war on drugs. Most people associate the war on drugs with Reagan, since he really advanced the agenda on drug laws and associated incarceration sentences. But Nixon was the one who began it all and made drugs public enemy number 1. The war on drugs was really started in order to go after some of the high-level dealers and traffickers. But the language of many of the new laws ended up in convictions for lower-level users. In addition to going after some of these higher-level dealers and traffickers, the Reagan administration in particular was very much in support of drug education for minors. That's where the DARE program originated from. The problem with DARE is that it was never tested and was never evaluated until the program was actually put into place. DARE has been shown to not work in keeping children from starting drugs. The curriculum relied heavily on the gateway hypothesis, which has not had much empirical support from the academic community. Nevertheless, thousands of school children go through the DARE program, and have actually shown increased drug use rates in comparison to those children who did not go through the program at all. The majority of Schedule 1, 2, and 3 drugs are illegal both at the state and the federal level, with the current exception of marijuana in certain states. So, if it's illegal in both jurisdictions, where then am I going to be prosecuted? Well, that depends on the amount of narcotics that you're caught with. Larger amounts are typically prosecuted federally, especially when those drugs are trafficked from another country or are moved across state lines. The state, on the other hand, goes after smaller amounts that aren't worth the federal government's time. The state, on the other hand, goes after smaller amounts that aren't worth the federal government's time. States will prosecute for personal use amounts as well as manufacturing, sale, or other types of possession crimes. They will also look at the location and the buyer of the drugs. If you are selling to a minor or you're selling within 1,000 feet of a school, those are both actions that normally will aggravate the severity of the drug offense. Many drug arrests are made for the possession of a controlled substance. In order to find if something has been in someone's possession, sometimes law enforcement often have to conduct a search to find the narcotic in question, unless it is left in plain view. While this lecture is not going to go into search and seizure laws and the associated protections, it has to be acknowledged that until the search is lawful, the drugs cannot be used as evidence in court. There are two types of possession that are important to drug laws. First, we have to look at actual possession. Actual possession requires that the narcotic be found either on the individual's person or in their immediate physical presence. This means that the police found the narcotic in your pocket or they found it in your car. The drugs were in your bedroom at your apartment. As long as those narcotics were clearly yours and the possession cannot be shared with anybody else, this is considered actual possession. In order to qualify for constructive possession, the drugs need to be in an area where the individual does not have physical possession of the narcotic, but has dominion and control over the area in which the narcotics were found. That means if the drugs were not found in my physical possession, meaning they were in my pants pocket or in my handbag, then anything in that shared space would be in possession of all involved. So think of it this way. I drive you home from work and you have a bag of weed in your pocket. We get pulled over for, let's say, a broken taillight, and you try and stash the weed between the car seats so that the police don't find it on your person. When the officer looks into the car, he sees the pot and he arrests us both because it's in the middle of a shared space. That is considered constructive possession of a narcotic. And of course, you could be in possession of the narcotic and you're trying to intend to sell or distribute that narcotic in question. So when we talk about possession with intent to distribute, we have to look at a few things. First, possession with intent to distribute is normally classified by the large amount of narcotics that are found in the individual's possession. This is not personal use amount of the narcotic. Instead, this is more than one person can possibly use by themselves. We have to look at the value of the drug as well. Most individuals cannot afford a large amount of narcotic in question. Instead, they have been given the large amount probably by somebody else, a higher level dealer, for instance, which indicates a possible trafficking or smuggling ring might be in play. Normally, the person in possession of the drugs is the middleman. Someone has given me these drugs and has asked me to sell them and get the money back to the original drug source. If the individual could not have afforded the drugs and was given to them by another person, then that's a second indicator towards possession with intent to distribute. Finally, we have to look at some sort of drug paraphernalia. This includes anything that might work to break up the large amount into smaller quantities to sell. This might include smaller baggies, a scale, or other packaging materials. This picture actually shows the perfect example of possession with intent to sell. You can see the larger bags that are being broken down, and you can also see the smaller packages that are ready to be sold on the street. Normally, when these items are found this way, it's indicative of possession with intent to distribute. Marijuana is by far one of the most popular illicit substances used in the United States. Other countries, including the Netherlands and North Korea, are legalized countries that allow for recreational use. The Netherlands has legalized possession up to 5 grams, has decriminalized public use, meaning that if you're caught, you would face a fine rather than incarceration, and actually has legal coffee shops which allow for public use of marijuana. The country has even decriminalized growth and allows for possession of 5 pot plants. Here in the United States, we're slowly moving towards total legalization, as we can see that Alaska, Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, and Washington, D.C. have legalized recreational use. 18 other states have decriminalized statutes, and 25 states have medicinal marijuana laws. It is still illegal at the federal level, however. Despite the recent move towards legalization in some areas and the support for legalization, we're still seeing the largest amounts of arrests coming from marijuana users. Legalization and decriminalization statutes really only apply to small personal use amounts of marijuana. The discussion about legalization is not taking large-scale growth operations like this one into account. A room this size with this many plants would probably be prosecuted under manufacturing and possession with intent to distribute statutes. Interestingly, pot plants grow like trees do in that they have rings inside their stems, with each new level of growth, there is a new ring signifying the age of the tree. With pot plants, each ring actually signifies a harvest. So for prosecution purposes, let's say there's about 80 or so plants in this room in the picture, if we're just looking at the rows and columns. If you cut into each one of these plants, let's say that we see 5 rings or so inside the stems of each plant. So with a little fancy multiplication, the federal government would actually prosecute you for the possession of 400 plants, even though there's only 80 physically present in the room. With larger grow operations like this one, there is normally a lot more money involved, and suddenly this is something that becomes a lot more interesting to the federal government than it does for the states. In addition to marijuana, we have seen an increase in the amount of methamphetamine use in our country over the last few decades. Popular shows like Breaking Bad have shown how lucrative it is to cook meth, but they also show the volatility of the drug itself. Crystal meth is something that you can cook up in your house with just a few over-the-counter items. More recently, a new form of crystal meth has developed called shake and bake meth. Shake and bake meth still uses over-the-counter items, but the recipe has evolved, and now we see a form that can be cooked just by using a 2-liter soda bottle as the cooking vessel. With the increases in meth use, we see an increased crackdown on its manufacture. Now with Methamphetamine Epidemic Act of 2005, we see that the government has created additional caveats that specifically address meth production. The law now requires regulation of over-the-counter purchases of precursor chemicals for manufacturing meth. This means that things like Sudafed are no longer stored in the aisles, but rather you have to go to the pharmacy counter to buy it. They're also going to scan your driver's license to see how much Sudafed you have purchased within the last year. That also simultaneously creates the record of those who are purchasing these over-the-counter drugs. Finally, we're going to take a closer look at shake and bake or one-pot meth. As I told you before, this is a new innovative way to make meth and it requires a 2-liter bottle as the cooking vessel. You can see everything that's included in this picture. You also need a lot less Sudafed than in the more traditional crystal meth recipe. It's still very explosive. You can see the Sudafed, you can see iodized salt, regular AA batteries, which you're going to need the lithium strips found inside, and lighter fluid, otherwise known as heat, which is antifreeze, sometimes acetone, and hydrochloric acid, which is actually used in a lot of chemical cleaners that you can buy at Lowe's or Home Depot. So now that we have seen what goes into shake and bake meth, we're going to see how it's done. In this video clip, you're actually going to see a real meth user make shake and bake meth. As you can see from the video, shake and bake meth is very easy to make and it takes little time in comparison to the more traditional style of cooking meth. You can see what a problem like this is. If the only thing standing between me and an explosion is a 2-liter pop bottle, I wouldn't feel very safe doing that sort of thing. But desperate times, I suppose. In this lecture, we have focused on alcoholism, gambling, drug use, and the laws that surround those issues. Like our previous lecture on public order crimes, the items that we have discussed here vary from state to state and even country to country. Gambling and drug use specifically are very different in foreign countries than they are here in the United States. But we're starting to see some change with the decriminalization and legalization laws of marijuana. As this is the last lecture of the semester, you will not be joining me any further for more lectures. Thank you all for your time and your attention during these 12 chapters, and I hope you've enjoyed these discussions of criminal law.